Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for inviting us to be here and for coming to our presentation. John and I are going to introduce ourselves, but before we do that, we just would like to do a little housekeeping. If you have questions throughout the presentation, if you will put those in the chat box, and I'll monitor for him and he'll monitor for me. And so if there's anything that we feel like we need to address while we're in the middle of the presentation, we'll do so. But we do plan to have a time at the end for you to ask some formal sort of questions for us to answer. In case we run out of time, we're both also willing to be contacted outside the presentation. So you're welcome to send us an email to ask us any additional information. Any of the resources you see that we showed today, typically we're very willing and open to sharing. So on the first slide, you're going to see our student success placemat. We actually have that in a blank format. So if it's something you'd be interested in using, we don't mind sharing. So, feel free to reach out to us throughout the presentation, but also after the presentation. John is also going to put a link in the chat. So we had completed our presentation before we got the questions that they wanted to make sure we all addressed for consistency. Those questions will be addressed throughout the presentation, but it might not be quite as clear when we're addressing what questions. So if you will look in the chat and click on that, you will see some, more clearly answered questions. So I'm Susan Burleson, and I'm the Vice President of the Davie campuses. We have two campuses at Davidson-Davie Community College, and I'm also the Vice President of Institutional Effectiveness. Since we submitted this presentation, my role has also changed. So very soon I'll also be the Executive Vice President of Academic and Student Affairs. Just a little bit about my background. I started my community college career as faculty member. I taught psychology, and for about 10 years, I moved out of the classroom and had various levels of leadership roles. I was also over all of our student success initiatives. So we're going to talk about, achieving the dream and completion by design. Currently, we're still working on Frontier Set. So we've been involved in some national initiatives, and usually I've been the lead for a lot of those initiatives. About 18 months ago, I had the opportunity to teach again, which was wonderful. So I had spent about a decade working with faculty on student success, and then I got to realize just how difficult it is to take what we had been talking about and put it back in practice in the classroom. So that was a great learning experience for me. I will let John introduce himself very quickly, and then we will move into the presentation.
Hey everyone, my name is John Hardy. I'm a math faculty at Davidson-Davie, and I'm also the Guided Pathways facilitator for Davidson-Davie through the North Carolina Guided Pathways project. I also serve for the community college system as a Guided Pathways coach, and also have helped with training future coaches as well with them. And also I'm leading their ITA project, which is helping to assess Guided Pathways institutes within the North Carolina Community College system, and to help them progress and to move forward and to continue the process of implementing Guided Pathways. And I'm currently working to become an equity coach also with the system, and hopefully we just started our first academy, and hopefully that'll pick up and continue the process of bringing equity to the forefront of and make sure it's addressed at all areas of the college. So I'm going to pass it back over to Susan real quick, and we're going to jump into the presentation.
So as I'm sure you are all aware, Guided Pathways is a process, and it starts from the time a student connects to the college, makes that first connection through whatever avenue that might be. And while what you're seeing on the screen goes through completion, we actually care about post-completion outcomes as well. So while today's topic is primarily focused on teaching and learning, that is, woven into lots of other experiences that our students will have. So at Davidson-Davie, since really 2011, 2012, we have been using something that we refer to as our student success placemat. And so you're seeing the front of it right here. And we distribute it on campus. And so, you know, frequently I walk into offices, well, pre-COVID, I would walk into offices and see this, you know, laminated and posted in someone's office. But this is sort of like a mini strategic plan as it relates to students and student success. So in 2011, we were involved in Achieving the Dream, and we were pretty young in Achieving the Dream. We had just become a completion by design college, and we were also going through accreditation. So we had sort of this perfect storm of student success initiatives. And with our accrediting body in the South, we have to do something called a quality enhancement plan. So that's a plan focused on student success. So we had these 3 initiatives, and we had, you know, jargon around all 3 initiatives. And so, you know, we had ATD, CBD, and the QEP. And so we decided we needed to create some framework that would allow us to organize all these initiatives and help people understand what was what. And it was important then to know what was what, primarily because of accreditation, because you had to be able to speak to the quality enhancement plan. So we used the lost momentum framework from Completion by Design, which is kind of what you see running there in the middle in the blue. And then we decided that we would sort of list all the things that we were doing on our campus in a year that was focused on connection, entry, progress, and completion. And then below that, you see the outcomes that we might expect as a result of the initiatives that you see on the top. So these are kind of our key performance indicators, and they change over time depending on what we have up there at the top. But you can see that there are things up there related to teaching and learning. So you can see above progress that we have the Center for Teaching and Learning. Underneath there is to incorporate teaching principles, which we'll talk about shortly. You can see guided pathways up there and lots of other things up there. So, you know, this is teaching and learning is part of a bigger plan that we have at the college. You'll see also LECM over on the left. So in 2018, 2019, we'll talk about this again in just a little bit as well. We had engaged with the Aspen Institute, and we had sort of done a from good to great visit with them that was based on the learnings that they were gaining from the Aspen Prize. And so, you know, you may know that they have sort of broadened the definition of student success. So you look at learning outcomes, equity and outcomes, completion outcomes, and labor market outcomes. So we did a little mapping, which you can see here, so that, you know, as we were trying to get our campus familiar with those outcomes, they could see the types of things we were doing that we anticipated would impact those outcomes. On the back of the placemat, so if you pull our placemat, you know, from 2011 to present, the front will look very similar in terms of, you know, just the format. The words will change. But the back, we always use to kind of highlight something that's just kind of top of mind for the college for that year. The first year we used it as a timeline, but after that we started to use it just to highlight information. So this was the back of the placemat that year. So since we were using those Aspen outcomes and the color coding, we went ahead and defined, you know, kind of what that meant. This was also the year that we engaged for the first time in the North Carolina Guided Pathways to Success project. We had, of course, kind of done a lot of that previously, but when, as we were sort of finishing Completion by Design, that's when the AACC Guided Pathways framework came about. So, you know, again, we're just sort of letting campus know so everybody kind of can talk this common language around student success. RISE, which you see here, I'm not going to get into, but that's sort of our North Carolina's version of developmental education redesign. Then you can see the guided teaching principles. So again, we're going to tell you more about how we came up with those guided teaching principles, but just wanted you to see this is a way that you can organize what's happening on your campus and share broadly with everyone in all roles. And hopefully everyone on campus can see themselves somewhere in, you know, the front of this. There is something we're all working on, many of us on multiple pieces. So just so you have a good understanding of the foundations of how we are where we are today in terms of teaching and learning, I wanted to go over a few of the things that contributed to our focus. So we were focused on improving student success through increased faculty engagement. So again, there were these organizations and these initiatives that kind of got us talking about things that we had kind of never talked about before. So when we joined Achieving the Dream, which officially was in 2010, that is when we started looking at data, and we started talking about equity, and we had these 3 sessions on Fridays, and most people were kind of blown away because those were not conversations we had. And of course, there was some paranoia, there was some suspicion that, oh my gosh, they're going to start looking at my data, and am I going to keep my job? And what if my students are not doing well? So we had to go to this process of saying data's good and it will not be used for bad, unless there's just this really long history of bad data, and then we'll have to have some conversations. But it was meant for improvement. It was not meant to be punitive. So soon thereafter, we became a completion by design college. And again, we started focusing on pathways. So prior to that, we had done lots of really cool, interesting pilot programs. And, they were impactful for students while they were on that part of their pathway. And as soon as they, took a step forward and lost all that special support that was part of the pilot, then a lot of times what you would see is you wouldn't continue to get the outcomes. So we were excited to be talking about, like everything along the student pathway. And it was great work, but we focused on the easy stuff and the low-hanging fruit. And while faculty were involved some in terms of redesigning programs of study, they decided what course should come first, what should come second. We made some choices about what type of electives belonged in programs. We significantly reduced our general education offerings based on what our transfer institutions would take and what programs felt like were the best fits. But other than that, we didn't really talk much about how does a faculty member impact completion in the classroom. So then we moved to this visit I was talking about earlier, where the Aspen Institute, and this was something that was made available to us through our system. So in North Carolina, we are kind of quasi-governed by our system. We do each have a board, but the system also provides system support. And so we had an opportunity to engage in an application process to have this Aspen site visit. And really that is when probably the tide turned and we began to really engage faculty in our work moving forward. So I will talk a little bit more about what we learned in our feedback report. So we had, I think, 5 individuals, Josh Weiner was one, come to our campus, and they interviewed people from all walks of their connection to the college. So it was very comprehensive. They interviewed board of trustees, business and industry, K-12 partners, they interviewed faculty, they interviewed students, they interviewed staff, they interviewed leadership. It was, like a day and a half worth of interviews. They examined our data, and then they wrote a report, and they shared with us, where are you doing great things and where do you have opportunities for growth? And so it was kind of a good to great conversation. You're doing good stuff, but here's how you could be even better. And here is the comment that came in the Aspen feedback report related to faculty and faculty engagement. So the recommendation was to appoint a faculty committee to define, I'll move this so I can see this, to define the qualities of effective instruction across the college and craft a strategy to address their conclusions through faculty professional development. So our president at the time convened a group, I think it was about 20 people, and probably 15 of the 20 were faculty. We had, I think, a couple people in leadership and a person who was involved in instructional design and is over our teaching and learning initiatives. So that became our Aspen task force. And I know Rob was maybe planning to jump on briefly. I don't know how many of you know Rob Johnstone or what his engagement is with all of you, but we knew him through Completion by Design. So he facilitated the Aspen faculty task force. And I think he spent 3 or 4 sessions with them over probably 9 or 10 months. And I'll show you in just a second the results of that task force. John, I think you were going to talk about Completion by Design.
Yeah, Susan, if you could, I can't find the blank placemat. There was a request from that in the chat, so I didn't know if you had that available, because I don't have it in my drive.
Okay.
On my work
I'll be
computer,
glad
so
to send it
thank
later.
You. Okay. Yes, so we had, from there, we had some of the members that were a part of that task force and a couple other members join in and went on a Completion by Design retreat where they actually sat down and learned about some different areas of where they can develop faculty understanding of what teaching and learning is and how it can be properly shown through both in the classroom and out of the classroom. And so building off the idea of the guided teaching principles that were being developed and the idea of how we can actually come up with true professional development, faculty professional development at the institution, it led to some new ideas of how we can really rethink the idea of onboarding, the idea of working with collaboration across different disciplines, the idea of making sure we are moving forward as faculty members at our institution, and so forth. And so building from that guided teaching principles, we started thinking about the ideas of how we incorporate it. So there was kind of 2 things that were really kind of going on while we were working on this. First, we'll talk about the guided teaching principles, which we came up with 6 of them, and I was a member of that task force that was sitting on and working on these principles. And it was not a fun process, fun with quotation marks, because there was a lot of arguing, a lot of heated debates. But in the long run, we really, Rob did a great job of making sure we really focus in on what is teaching and learning at Davidson-Davie, and how does that relate to our students. And these are the 6 guided teaching principles that we came up with. Though these are free to look at and to repurpose and to take with you. They are on our website, and I mean, I got them hanging in my office. They're hanging in copy rooms and everywhere. And when we first started doing this, we started the idea of creating these just to kind of give an outline of what we think teaching and learning is at Davidson-Davie. But it slowly developed into the idea of being a part of everything that is faculty and teaching and learning at Davidson-Davie. And that kind of leads into the next part with the idea of how we were working with the Completion by Design retreats, coming back, thinking about the different committees that we can form to build this idea of what it is at Davidson-Davie. And this guided teaching principles started to get incorporated into those different areas. And so I believe there was 4 or 5 faculty, I can't remember, that actually went on the retreat, 5 faculty. And when we came back, we decided on 4 specific areas that we wanted to build some committees to actually develop the idea of faculty. And so I'm going to pass it over to, I think Susan, at the next slide is that, yes. And I'm going to pass it over to Susan, let her talk a little bit about the idea. I was specifically working on the faculty professional learning idea. And so I'm going to let Susan talk about it because she has the more general idea of all 4.
Yeah, and I think one of the themes you're going to hear as we talk through, and we'll hit it again when we get to challenges and lessons learned, is that, you know, it's hard to fit in these kinds of conversations if you're just showing up and doing your job every day. You'll never find time for this stuff. So, you know, we were going on retreats and we were working with national partners, and, you know, we were making the time and space to have these conversations. So we decided at the conclusion of the Aspen Task Force, which was kicked off in 2016, it completed in spring of 2017, we decided to apply for the National Teaching and Learning Institute. And that is held in Washington State, and Achieving the Dream has has some connection to it. But, you know, we completed an application and we were accepted. And so we took a team, and it was in the summer. We stayed in the dorm. We took our president, we took 2 vice presidents, we took a director of support for adjuncts, and then we took the rest were faculty. And so we went and we spent, I think, 5 days together. We roughed it together, sleeping on dorm beds, and we worked from really sun up to sundown, talking about how do we take these principles and turn them into something that is actionable, that is woven, you know, throughout the faculty experience. So we started to think about the faculty pathway. So we've been talking for a while about the student pathway, but, you know, how can you take the loss momentum framework and think about what does that look like for the faculty member? So here you can see sort of the 4 teams or subcommittees or task force that came out of our conversations at that institute. So it doesn't, you know, kind of line up nicely along the student pathway like the for faculty. So, but we do onboard faculty, and then, you know, faculty have opportunities for promotion. Then there's learning, and, you know, learning's going to vary depending on where you are in your career. So we did think about that type of thing. And then how do you know that you're incorporating these principles, and how do you know that it's working, and how do you continually improve? So there was some focus on outcomes assessment as well. That's probably the one we did least well. The other 3, I think we did incorporate pretty well, but outcomes assessment kind of fizzled and died a little bit, but we're about to revive that one, I think. Another thing too here was, you know, at the time I am an administrator, and I was an administrator at that time. And, you know, we really wanted to get out of the way, and we wanted this to be faculty led, faculty owned, and faculty driven. We had, you know, good, we still have wonderful faculty, and we had people who had gotten very engaged and who were really good at leading these efforts. And so, you know, from an administrator standpoint, we wanted to provide the resources and the support, the time and the space, but otherwise we got out of the way and we let the faculty do the work. And that was important. I mean, you know, throughout all of our student success work, we've had to think about our culture and what works for our culture. So, you know, what we say today may or may not work for where you are, and, you know, what the culture and climate is like at your institution. But, you know, these are the types of things that, you know, when we were introspective, we knew we had to do it this way or it would not work. So here you can see a little bit about the topics that were underneath the 4 committees. And faculty onboarding is a place, I think, that we made a lot of movement. So, you know, we used to just sort of have these standard ways of posting positions and recruiting, and there are like 3 places we would put it, and not focused on equity at all. The position vacancy, the PVA basically said, here's what we're looking for. We hope you have those qualities. If you do, apply. There was nothing about us and why you might want to work for us. We also tended to put, you know, everything possible that a faculty member might do in the description. And, you know, now it is aligned to the guiding teaching principles, what the job description for the faculty member is. The position description is much more engaging, much more inviting. And, you know, we have changed the entire process in terms of onboarding to make sure that, you know, we are at least trying to, we aren't always successful, but to have a diverse faculty and staff that match our population. And, you know, for a long time, we were not there, and we're doing a better job of that. For faculty progress, in North Carolina, we don't have tenure, we don't have unions, but we do, as a college, we have made the decision to put in a ranking process. So faculty can apply for rank. Of course, you know, probably all institutions, nothing else for accreditation purposes, we have to do performance reviews. So there was a committee that was actually aligned to our faculty senate that revised the processes for the evaluation process and for the rank process to align to our principles. Faculty professional development, this is again one of those places where thanks to some external resources and a Title III grant, we have really been able to take off in terms of creating a Center for Teaching and Learning. We also engaged with Achieving the Dream to help faculty, not us, but to help faculty think about the types of things that go into creating a successful Center for Teaching and Learning. They were not there to direct it, but to collaborate and to provide information that could help us make good decisions in terms of that Center for Teaching and Learning. And that's another thing I'm going to hit on again at the end. But again, for our culture, having people from the outside come in and work with us has allowed us to move in directions we couldn't have done had we not brought in, external experts. Because sometimes, when the advice comes from an administrator, you don't get the same buy-in, you don't get the same excitement. For outcomes assessment here, we have not moved as much in this direction as would have been nice, but we have a decent program review outcomes assessment process where at the end of each semester, faculty look at course learning outcomes, and then we map those to program learning outcomes. But beyond that, we've not really figured out how do we assess the guiding teaching principles and how do we know who's doing what and what impact it's having. But that is work that's still on our placemat and something that we will continue to focus on in the future. Thanks to a lot of our initiatives and work with national institutes, we've definitely improved the culture of inquiry. And I think it's across roles. So, we're hearing lots of conversation right now from a couple different faculty groups about really wanting to revise and create a meaningful program review process, which John is somewhat leading. So this is a picture, and I know it's probably kind of small, but as part of our completion by design work, we were working with NC State, which is a university in North Carolina, and their faculty over their community college leadership program got engaged in some of the faculty professional development that John mentioned earlier. So we decided to work with her and create basically a faculty pathway and used a lost momentum framework to try to map that out. And so here you can see, and she's written some articles. Her name's Audrey Yeager, and she's written some articles related to this faculty pathway. But you can see that there are, things over on the left that would be beneficial and would probably be attractive to faculty. And then there are things that we do that, are roadblocks or barriers or are unattractive to faculty. So these are good things to look through and think about as you are thinking about how can you create a faculty pathway to excellence. So I am going to turn it over to John now.
Okay. And so kind of building off that, we want to talk a little bit about the actual progress that actually came from these different groups, different initiatives, because one of the things we all kind of talk about when we're, as a faculty member, I know you've been on a committee and said, oh, this is just another committee doing another meeting, but let's actually talk about what progress we did make, what steps we did take, and specifically how did that affect faculty and our students. And so we're going to look at 4 different areas and kind of focus in on some changes and some things we have implemented. The first one will be our policy, procedural, and structural changes, which includes, again, these are going to include some things from those previous 4 committees and initiatives before that, and also with guided pathways implemented as well. We'll also talk a little bit about the creation of the Center for Teaching and Learning that kind of stemmed from the 4 projects, 4 groups, and from Aspen and from completion by design. And then Susan will talk a little bit about the Title III initiatives that we have currently going on. And then I will wrap up with talking about the North Carolina Guided Pathways Project and what we've been working on from there. So with the policies, procedures, and structural changes, beyond just the idea of rewriting faculty job descriptions and making sure that we are incorporating those teaching and learning principles into everything that we are working on, we also focus in on the idea of what we're doing as faculty and how that has affected student success. Certain things such as how we are implementing our LMS. We use Moodle. You maybe use Moodle Canvas or Blackboard. It depends on where you're at. Very similar structure, but the idea is that we want to make sure, one, we had consistent training and consistent implementation of Moodle, but also to make sure everything that we do within our LMS is accessible. And so we did a lot of work with different organizations to make sure we had all of our accessibility needs met. And we even had leadership give out some money to actually get some good software to actually make sure all of our students had what they needed. We also are working with Starfish. Starfish is a service that will provide a bunch of different different little things that can be added on to our actual Moodle and integrated into our colleague or our actual grade book. But the main thing we made sure and incorporate was early alerts, where we both filled out surveys at certain percentage marks throughout the semester to make sure we alert both advisors and career coaches and other faculty if a student is trailing or struggling. And then we also allowed faculty to raise flags when that was occurring in between those percentages, percent marks as well. Other things is we also, beyond that faculty evaluation and rank, we also looked at the idea of our organization and academics, and we worked on the idea of what do faculty feel they need as a supervisor or above them to actually make sure they are appropriately teaching, providing effective teaching and learning. And so we did do some restructuring that was focusing on making sure we had the right people grouped together that can work together within a certain area, and making sure that there was a trickle down that also worked backwards as well, so that if a faculty has a concern, that supervisor knows and understands that concern, and it could take that forward to higher level leadership, and it trails back up as well. And so we're continuing to finish off that process. I think we're about to the point we have had a little bit of changes, and Susan's now stepping up the plate for that, and we're glad for that. But beyond that, I think we're putting ourselves in a position where this coming year we'll have all changes made. Beyond that, one of the biggest things that we had, and one of our most exciting things for faculty, was our Center for Teaching and Learning that got started. So the Aspen Task Force, one, we did define those teaching and learning principles, but two, we were talking, the whole idea was also about how does that lead to faculty professional development. And working with a couple of different institutes, including Sinclair and Carnegie Mellon, one of the biggest things that they said was to have some place that was centralized for professional development, instead of just having it pop up randomly or just have sporadic people lead different things. There needed to be one central place where teaching and learning can have that professional development develop out of. And so we worked and put in a proposal to the president after the Aspen Task Force. Definitely got shot down because that budget was way too high. But after work with the 4 committees and the teaching and learning groups, some more proposals went up, got pushed back, and slowly, after about 3 more committees and groups and proposals, we have our center in place now. It has been up good full year, technically almost 2 years, pretty much. And the idea is that it's a place where anybody can go and ask for professional development, and there is a person that is over the center that can take that idea, find resources, find money, find outside people to help with that, or previous presentations or professional development that's out there that can lead that, or that is associated with that, and bring that to Davidson-Davie. It's also, they're also always kind of the idea of assessing, what the actual institution is providing us as faculty members as a whole. So for instance, if there is a academic affairs meeting, the leadership is actually working with the center and saying, okay, is this going to work? Is this going to help our faculty? And in the past, I know we've been, as a faculty member, been in some academic affairs meeting and said, okay, well, this isn't, don't know if this is really something for me, or is this really going to help me? But Now that we have the center, they're working with that and working well to the point where every time we have an academic affairs meeting or professional development, it's going to hit a majority of the faculty and help them in some way. I can go into details and a lot of time. I could spend about an hour just talking about the center because there's a lot of things built that we got from there. If you do have more specific questions about that, you can always email either of us and we can give you a lot of background, some more specifics about the structure and the idea of the budget and things like that. But for time concerns, I'm going to make sure we keep moving forward. And I'm going to pass back over to Susan because I'm going to let Susan talk more about Title III because she has a lot more not understanding, but experience with it.
So we were very fortunate that the timing just sort of worked out that we were funded for a Title III Strengthening Institutions federal grant through the Department of Education. And so that started in 2019. It allowed us to make some good hires, and it also allowed us to really put a lot of resources into faculty professional development and the Center for Teaching and Learning. So it is called Project Dial Success, and that stands for Differentiated Instruction and Intervention for Academic and Life Success. And you know, there's sort of 3 arms of the Title III grant, and one is focused on faculty. And so we do a summer institute, and the summer institute sort of has 2 pieces to it. One is that anybody can apply for it who is faculty, full-time or adjunct. And I think we took 17 last year, and I believe we're going to take 17 again this year. I think the grant pays for 15, and we've just been fortunate to be able to pay for the rest. So we do pay faculty to come in the summer. Most of our faculty have 9-month contracts, so they're off, or they're just adjuncting a little bit for some summer classes. So it's again that time and space that allows faculty to really be focused on some project that is meant to impact student success. In the grant, we have 5 themes, and so last year it was growth mindset and resiliency, so all the professional development focused on that. And this year it is culturally responsive teaching. So that's working in conjunction with our equity work as well. In that grant, one of the things that we did was we, of course, used lots of data, and we identified the courses that have high enrollment and low success, and that have pretty big achievement gaps. And so then we invite 5 to 7 faculty out of disciplines which rotate each year to participate in a different type of professional development related to redesigning a particular discipline and the courses within that discipline. And then in conjunction with that, we renovate a classroom. So as the faculty who are going through both the Summer Institute and the more focused discipline professional development, they get a first shot at teaching in a new, flexible, high-tech environment using the things that they've learned. And then also as part of that grant, which impacts students and involves a lot of conversation with faculty, is that we were able to hire 2 completion coaches. And these 2 people kind of work with those students who you might think about that are kind of in the middle. So, if you can intervene with those students, you can often help them be more successful or prevent them from dropping out. So those 2 people came on board, back in August, and are both carrying caseloads of about 300 students each.
So through completion by design and other initiatives, we had been working on the guided pathways idea and implementing that at Davidson-Davie. But the North Carolina Community College system decided to take on a project itself and actually work specifically with certain schools and develop the guided pathways together as collectively as a system. We've had 2 cohorts go through, which includes, I believe, a total of 35 institutes. So a little more than half of the system has been through the guided pathways done guided pathways work with the system. We were trying to start a cohort C about a little over a year ago. Naturally, that didn't happen. Hopefully, we're trying to pick that back up at some point. I'm working with them to try to get that going again. But I want to go over some of the things that we did accomplish through the Guided Pathways project, working with other schools in North Carolina. And so specifically how faculty were really kind of involved, starting from the front and moving forward. So I'm going to quickly go through these next couple of slides just because of time, but you do have these. You can always look back at them. And if you have questions about specifics, you can always email us after the presentation. So one of the first things we did with faculty is make sure that those current initiatives, those initiatives that we had started and been working on with Completion by Design, ATD, Aspen, with the 4 committees and everything, were integrated into the Guided Pathways work. One of the biggest things that I always tell people when I'm, or institutions when I'm coaching them, is the idea that Guided Pathways is not a set standard. It's not a step-by-step process. It's the idea of making sure that collectively as an institution, you are focused on the idea of Guided Pathways, not the idea of incorporating Guided Pathways directly. And so we wanted to start where we had been and make sure we are reworking the wheel or restarting the process that we already started. And so there were surveys that were sent out, both graded by me and by other other organizations, that we made sure to understand and see what was happening with faculty and what faculty had done from after the center was completed and the teaching principles were incorporated. And so one of the first things we did was programs and departments, making sure they were having conversations from these surveys that were sent back. So the idea of how we were actually looking at student success, how we're actually incorporating their student success into their departments and their programs, and trying to learn the idea of how they were helping students through their different programs. And so we kind of took each of those different areas to develop the idea of what's the best approach for the institution to help students through their pathway. And so from there, we reassess all of our maps as a whole. The idea of sequencing in our gateway versus gateway keeper, our gatekeeper courses, critical success courses, and there was a lot of different bunch of conversations going on. And right before COVID, we had done so much work and got so many things redone. We redid our whole catalog and all of our sequencing. We took it from where we had specific semesters sequenced out to the idea of a true list, in order to where you could choose which courses you wanted to take each semester, but there was a sequence that allowed them to know what order to take. And with so much work we had done, and right before COVID was right when we released a new catalog and our new website, and everything kind of paused. And so we kind of had to take a step back and say, okay, well, how are things going? And so we felt that things were going great. And so we wanted to kind of refocus and say, well, wait a minute. One thing we did not really work on is the idea of our students actually learning. And so we had to start asking ourselves certain questions. And so, Susan, move forward. Questions about, are we actually teaching and following our mission, vision, value? Are we actually, our programs outcomes really associated to student success and really providing that and helping them move forward? Or are we just providing just an overview, or are we actually giving them a clear path to get them to that end? So there was a lot of questioning going on while COVID was going on. And so we're trying to get to that point where we can actually start developing a true process for assessing learning at our institution. And so go to the next one real quick. One of the first things we did was make sure, not only as individual faculty, but as the faculty as a whole, we were embodying those teaching learning principles. We were incorporating the idea of our mission, vision, and values and our equity mindset throughout anything we did. In other words, we did not look at the idea of restructuring our onboarding process and our rank process and the way we were evaluating ourselves as a means to control, but as a means to make sure we are setting the standard of what we expect from our fellow faculty. In other words, we took on the idea that we were, as a faculty member, incorporating this because we choose to do that. In other words, there's a kind of a mindset idea that has to be incorporated within the faculty to say that we want to do this, not that we're being told to do this and we're going to follow from there. And then from there, we started assessing, are we actually assessing our data correctly? Are we getting the correct data? And so we started asking faculty about what data they're getting, how are they assessing it, how are they utilizing it? And that's leading about to the point where we are now, where we're starting that idea of, well, faculty are getting different data sets. They're looking at data in different ways. They're assessing their programs and their departments and their courses in different ways. And so it's starting the steps towards the idea of actually redesigning our full program, our program review, our course learning outcomes, and so forth. And how do we incorporate our teaching and learning principles into that, which is going to be the big focus. And so we have a couple committees working on that. Our actual student learning outcomes committee is actually being led by our faculty senate president. And we're taking those steps to get to the point where we can actually provide true understanding. Are we actually helping our students learn? And so that fourth pillar, that's always the hardest one. Every time I talk with institutions about guided pathways, the fourth pillar is always the most difficult one. But if you've set the groundwork in other areas and you've started those initiatives and you have those conversations, you can learn that idea of how to start building towards making sure your students are learning. And so we're almost at that point. I would, if COVID hadn't hit, I think we would probably have gotten to that point by now. But I think everybody's felt the effects of COVID. It's pushed us into that. We need to add COVID to the challenges slide, I believe. That's one of the things we're missing on there.
Yeah, that's probably true. So, looking back over, I guess the last at least 5 years, maybe more, what are the challenges that we've experienced and what kind of lessons have we learned? And, hopefully some of this will help you avoid some of the pitfalls we may have experienced. I'm sure your campuses are just like ours, where you have those really gung-ho, go-getter faculty and staff who serve on practically every committee on campus. And then, you have a whole nother set of folks who probably have lots to contribute, but for whatever reason, fly underneath the radar. So it's always a challenge to get the majority involved. And, I will say early on when we were having conversations about program redesign, there were probably 10 of us who were in every conversation. And, by the time we got a majority in the conversation, us 10 were ready to bang our heads on the table, because it was just like, oh, good Lord, do we have to talk about this again? Let's just do something. But, it definitely takes time, and that's going to be one of the lessons learned. It takes way more time to do the work than you ever anticipate. And again, it really is going to depend on your culture. We are this very collaborative, we got to talk through everything kind of culture versus, top down and you just sort of do what you're told to do and trust the process. So it is good if early on you can try to involve as many as possible, because that'll speed up that consensus building process. I've already mentioned this one, which is, you need time and space for the improvements. And it's really, really hard if you don't carve that out in schedules to actually get any movement. We had varying degrees of this on our campus. Our previous president and even our current president, they're very open to change. Our previous president was, and one of the reasons why we were in so many national initiatives, she's out there on the national scene. She still is, even in retirement. I reported to her, and when she came back from a conference, it literally was drinking from a fire hose. She had all these articles for me and all these brochures and all these ideas. And it was like, when I walked out, it was like, oh God, I'll never be able to do all this stuff. But, we had to shift the mindset of our campus that, while we did some things great, a 30% graduation rate means 70% are not graduating. So there's still a need for change, even if we're doing better than the community college right next door. So you do have to recognize that, if you keep doing what you're doing, you're going to get the same results. And so it's important to examine yourself and to look at your data and figure out where are the places you should focus your efforts when it comes to change. We're also an institution, and this has been true with our equity work as well, where, man, we will talk and talk and talk, and we will make everybody aware of, the issues, but we won't necessarily figure out, all right, now that we know that we need to be focused on this or that, now what do we do? What does that mean for me and my role? What does that mean for John and his role? What does that mean for a professional advisor? What does that mean, for somebody in enrollment services? So, it's making that shift from talking about it and knowing about it to actually doing something about it. So that is a challenge and continues to be a challenge. Lessons learned. So, there are your curmudgeons. There are those naysayers who can sometimes, if they get in the right venue or get the right person to listen, it can spread out and it can affect a majority. So we had a few of those. And what we found is sometimes it was good to just go and talk with that person and say, what's your hang up? What is it that bothers you? We had a person on our campus who actually was one of the most innovative faculty members I can remember us having. She started wonderful clubs and she cared deeply about her students, but she was sort of just anti-student success initiatives. And she thought it was, we were drinking Kool-Aid and it was the initiative of the month and nothing was going to stick. And, when we started talking about program redesign, she kind of really went up against the wall with us. And after some personal conversations, she started to get it. And then she won over everybody else. We didn't have to do it anymore. The other thing too here is about external support. So I mentioned earlier, we are the type of institution that if somebody from inside, if our president had said, you need to change X, everybody would have said no. But if Rob Johnstone came and said, you need to change X, we'd be like, oh, let's talk about that. And we did. So we recognize that, and that's sort of the direction in which we went. This is something we've learned even more. It's funny, John and I think put these slides together for another presentation before COVID. And now we have learned this even more this year, but it's hard to get everybody together in a room and talk. And so, using technology to get people there and to get people engaged. We didn't do a lot of that in this presentation, but when you poll and, use little quick surveys and things like that, it gets people engaged and gets them talking. Whereas before they might would have just kind of stayed invisible. You have to be able to maintain relationships across levels. So a lot of times if you try to just kind of stay vertical, then you might not be able to get the resources to support. And then, of course, again, in our institution, if it had been something coming from the top down, we would have got tons of resistance. So you really got to work all levels. And then I've already mentioned this, you need more time than you ever think you're going to need, kind of like these presentations.
Quickly, we'll mention a couple things that we're going to be working on soon. One is the biggest thing we want to do with our guided pathways work is actually work on pathways for part-time students. That's one of the things that we were about to work on right when COVID hit, because we want to make sure we had our catalog in place before we started doing that. But we found it's a very difficult process to work out full pathways for part-time students, and we're about to start that work back up. Using data to increase student success, student engagement and success is a big thing. We've talked about that multiple times, and the idea of program review and student learning outcomes and so forth. We've got a bunch of different initiatives taking place with that. Susan, I think.
Yeah, if we want to stop here, I think we can. And if anybody has any questions, if they want to unmute themselves and ask, then we're more than willing to answer. Or if you want to put something in the chat.
I'm going to quickly repost the questions page that we posted at the beginning of the presentation in case somebody came late and needs that.
I know it's after lunch there, so maybe you guys are quiet as a result. Talk a little more about the Title III grant. Sure. So I can start by telling you that it was unsuccessful the first time. So we submitted it and got some pretty good feedback from the reviewers, and so we decided to submit it a second time. So with strengthening institution grants, you kind of have to talk about a couple of different things, and you go through sort of a SWOT analysis. And so we were at the time, of course, primarily, we were interested in making sure that we got faculty engaged in our student success work. So much of it was focused on the professional development that I talked about earlier, and it's establishing the Center for Teaching and Learning. Since we didn't get it initially, And it was another 2 years, I think, before we did get it because they funded down the slate in between. We went ahead as a college and tried to lay some foundations for the Center for Teaching and Learning, and we actually got our first director, I think about 2 months before we actually found out we got the grant. But it has allowed us to hire a director, and that person is unbelievable. She's very dynamic. She is very strategic, and so we have been able to really make a lot of movement. The bulk of the budget, is focused on the technology that we're implementing in our classrooms. So, one of the things we wanted to kind of move away from is that sage on the stage type of classroom. And so we have like instructor presentation stations that are more in the middle of the room. We have flexible furniture. We have smart boards and mobile, smaller smart boards that can be, used at a station of students. Unfortunately, with COVID, we've not been in the classroom as much, but we have 2 classrooms that we've already redone, and we've just began the process of renovating 2 more, which will be completed over the summer. And then faculty go through various levels of professional development that will impact how they use that. Part of the Center for Teaching and Learning also involves a technology test kitchen. So the technology test kitchen is a place where faculty can go anytime and try out all this cool technology that they will eventually have in the classroom. So by the time we finish on our 2 campuses, I think we'll have 8 classrooms that will be renovated, and hopefully we've got about 100 faculty members, full-time faculty members at the college, about probably 300 adjuncts. And, we've seen really good engagement and really great responses to the Summer Institute work. A little over $2 million was the award. We used a consultant, Ramona Munsell, who I would highly recommend. I understand out of the 31 grants that were awarded in 2019, her writers got over half of them. So. Ramona Munsell. I think it's Munsell. You're welcome to send me an email. I can send you the contact information. Thank you all for attending. And I'll send the blank placemat to somebody to make sure it gets to you. Completion coaches are not faculty. They are hired to be completion coaches.
Yeah, our faculty is strictly faculty. We have centralized advising, and our completion coaches are based with them.
Trish, they're not really with counseling. They do report up through the student affairs side of the house, though. But they are kind of like next level advisors. They're a little more intrusive.
Yeah, they work a lot with advisors and kind of bringing in at the beginning of those, getting them into entryway and everything. And they also work a lot with students, minority male mentoring programs, and our I've just blanked on it. Gosh.
Well, I was going to say too, we use as part of Title III.
Single stop. Gosh,
yeah, we also predictive analytics through Starfish. And so we use the predictive analytics module to, be proactive in identifying students who, we might anticipate would struggle. And we try to, provide proactive reach outs to them before they need us the most and might not be able to recover.
Okay, so we are at time. I'm going to go ahead and end, and then I will meet both you, Susan and John, in your encore presentation in the next Zoom room, okay? Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.